The corridor stretches ahead like the throat of some slumbering beast, long, dim, and echoing with the hollow drip of water somewhere deep within the palace walls. Torches burn low, their smoke curling into shadows, mingling with the heavy perfume of incense that clings stubbornly to the air. Yet even the incense falters here. Beneath its sweetness creeps another scent, acrid, damp, and sour, a scent that does not belong to stone or velvet or the passing of centuries. It clings to the tapestries as though stitched into their threads. It settles into the flagstones as if the very pores of the palace have drunk it in. It is faint enough to be doubted, strong enough to be unforgettable. You breathe shallowly, but it still reaches you, curling at the edge of your senses, pricking the back of your throat, refusing to let you pass without noticing. Courtiers move quickly through this stretch of hallway. Their silks whisper against the stone, their faces turned away, eyes fixed on the ground. They say nothing, but their movements speak. They do not linger here, not because of the cold or the shadows, but because of what this place remembers. Once, they say, she walked here daily, her jewels glinting under candlelight, her head held high, her gowns trailing the scent that has never left. Servants knew to open windows when she passed, even in the dead of winter. Priests burned extra incense before mass. Foreign dignitaries learned to school their faces when she entered the room. Yet still, the smell always arrived first. And long after she was gone, it stayed. The maids who scrubbed her chambers swore the scent would seep back by morning, as though summoned by her absence. Guards on night watch spoke of feeling a draft that carried it, sharp and unrelenting, down empty corridors. Some claimed it was not the memory of her body, but the body of the empire itself, carrying the same slow, unclean rot. Her name is not spoken here without caution. To some, she was a victim, to others, an omen. To all, she was a reminder of something Spain would never wash away. And as you stand here, breathing in the air she left behind, you begin to understand. This was no ordinary misfortune. This was the scent of a dynasty's slow collapse, carried on the breath of its most fragile child. If the stories of her life make you shiver now, imagine forgetting them forever. Don't just watch. Subscribe to Chronicles, so history's darkest whispers aren't buried again. She was born beneath the weight of two crowns. The daughter of King Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria. Her first breath carried centuries of royal blood. Blood so closely guarded that it had long ceased to be a blessing. Her father was her mother's uncle. Their union, like so many before it, was not forged in love but in the cold arithmetic of dynastic preservation. Every branch of her family tree bent back upon itself, tangled in a design meant to keep the power of the Habsburg name pure, untouched by foreign lines. From the moment she was swaddled in silk, she was not a child, but a promise. Her life had been claimed before she could speak, pledged to the service of alliances and treaties. Court scribes recorded her betrothal discussions as casually as they might list grain shipments or naval repairs. In Europe's great game of power, she was a chess piece, delicate, dazzling, and expendable. In the courts of the 17th century, blood was more than lineage, it was currency. Purity of blood meant purity of claim, a weapon in the endless rivalries between empires. The Habsburgs had made it a creed, a superstition masquerading as strategy. They sealed their borders with marriages, binding uncles to nieces, cousins to cousins, generation after generation, until their veins became a closed loop. The body of the empire was preserved in its own image, unchanged, untainted, and slowly, invisibly sickening. From her earliest years, the signs were there, a faintness that came without warning, a pallor that no amount of rouge could mask, a fatigue that clung to her like a shadow, making the long hours of court ceremony an ordeal. Her skin would break into rashes at the slightest irritation, the blemishes hidden under powders that only deepened their sting. When she walked the grand halls beside her mother, her posture was regal, but her steps were slow, as if the weight of the crown's expectations pressed upon her even then. In the gardens, when other children of the court ran beneath the cypress trees, she sat quietly, fanning herself against a heat no one else seemed to feel. When she did join their games, Her breath came too fast, her cheeks blotched with exhaustion. The governesses whispered their concern behind closed doors, but before the king and queen, they spoke only of her beauty, her grace, her prospects as a future bride. Illness was never a convenient truth in politics. If you can see her now, crowned in gold before she ever knew the weight of it, you know she was not just a princess. She was the hinge on which the fate of an empire swung. And if you will not help remember her, then history will choose to forget. Subscribe to Curse Chronicles, or step into the comments and tell me why her story should fade into dust. The palace moved in a choreography of silence. Courtiers glided through corridors with practiced grace, their eyes forward, their conversations clipped, but their movements always betrayed them. A sudden flutter of a fan before a face, a gloved hand brushing too casually across the bridge of the nose, the faint swish of fabric as someone stepped aside, not out of deference, but to create just enough space to breathe without drawing notice. The perfumers worked like conspirators in hidden rooms, away from the eyes of the court. They crushed lavender and rosemary until the air was thick with their oils, blended exotic resins from the east, steeped petals in rosewater so concentrated it stung the eyes. But even the most potent of their concoctions failed before the hour was done. The odor always returned, clinging to her silks, winding through the air like an uninvited guest, immune to artifice. They tried herbal sachets sewn into her gowns, stitched so discreetly they could pass for decorative charms. They prepared alchemical perfumes, each vial promising to bind the scent to something sweet, to cage it within layers of musk and amber. They bathed her in vinegar and rare oils, hoping to scour the body clean and replace the air around her. Each attempt collapsed under the same truth. This was no scent the human hand could master. Beyond the palace walls, the matter was not ignored. Foreign ambassadors, sworn to observe and report, noted her condition in letters wrapped in layers of coded script. Their words traveled across borders and seas, carrying whispers to rival courts. A princess marked by illness, a symbol of weakness in the blood that ruled Spain. In Paris, in Vienna, in Lisbon, her name became a footnote in political reports, a liability wrapped in brocade and jewels. The first public humiliation came not in a council chamber, but in the Cathedral of Santa Maria. It was a holy day, the nave packed with nobility and clergy. Incense burners swung from golden chains, spilling fragrant smoke into the vaulted air. Yet when she entered, the mingled scents faltered. The faithful lowered their eyes to their hymnals, but the shuffle of feet and the tightening of jaws betrayed them. By the time she reached her place beside her mother, the smoke could not hide the truth. It drifted toward the high altar, curling around the crucifix, until even the priests faltered in their prayers. You're hearing this because you're one of the few who still care about the truth beneath royal portraits. If that matters to you, prove it. Subscribe to Curse Chronicles. If not, tell me in the comments why these stories should vanish. Behind the closed doors of the Alcazar, truth moved in whispers. The servants knew more than the courtiers ever would, for it was their hands that prepared the masking scents each morning. Maids rose before the sun to boil rosemary and thyme in copper pots, letting the steam rise into the fabrics of her gowns. They ground cloves into fine powder, pressing it into small embroidered pouches to be hidden in her sleeves. In the kitchens, the older cooks mixed honey with vinegar and cinnamon, creating syrups she was instructed to sip before public appearances. Remedies handed down more from superstition than science. They spoke of her with pity when alone, but in front of others, their voices grew careful. Any remark about her condition could be heard, repeated, and punished. Still, in the servants' quarters, there was no denying the truth. Nothing they made lasted. The scent returned as if it had a will of its own, as though it clung to her not as a symptom, but as a shadow. In the royal infirmary, the physicians argued over causes. Some blamed her diet, too much rich meat, too little fresh air. Others declared it an imbalance of the four humors, insisting that purging, bleeding, or bathing her in mineral waters would restore harmony. A few, their voices low and their glances wary, suggested that the problem lay deeper, in the very blood that bound her to the crown. These were the doctors who spoke of concentration of inheritance and the dangers of repeating the same unions for generations. They did not linger long at court. Her role as a marriage prize became a delicate negotiation. Letters were sent to Vienna, to Paris, to Lisbon, offering her hand as part of treaties and alliances. In response, envoys would arrive, their purpose disguised as diplomacy, to meet her in the grand halls. They came with smiles and polite words, but after the formalities, many departed with unreadable faces. Some wrote later of unforeseen considerations. Others sent no word at all. One by one, the most promising matches slipped away without open refusal, leaving her betrothal unresolved. King Philip IV, worn by age and war, saw the shadow gathering over his daughter's future. In council, he spoke of her as radiant, virtuous, and fit to be queen in any court in Europe. In private, his gaze lingered on her too long, as though searching for the child she had once been before the sickness took hold. The guilt was a silent companion. He had upheld the tradition of marrying within the bloodline, believing it to be a safeguard. Now, in her frailty, he saw the cracks it had carved into the future of his house. If you understand the cost of silence in these walls, then you know why her story matters. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles so the voices of those who lived it are not lost. If you will not, then tell me in the comments why you would let them fade. Across the Pyrenees, Louis XIV did not need spies to weaken Spain. He needed only patience and whispers. The French court devoured each report sent by its ambassadors in Madrid. The accounts spoke not only of political tensions and military strain, but of something more human, more damning. A young Spanish princess whose presence could sour a reception hall. The Sun King understood that such details, repeated in the right ears, could corrode prestige faster than war. Diplomats carried the tale from salon to salon, weaving it into the tapestry of Spain's perceived decline. In Vienna, the Austrian branch of the Habsburg family read these same dispatches with unease. Blood bound them to the Spanish crown, but the bond was no longer a source of pride. It was a looming liability. Their own political standing rested on the image of strength and stability. To see their Spanish kin faltering under the weight of their own traditions was to glimpse a mirror they dared not face too long. Behind closed doors, imperial advisors debated whether the Spanish inheritance was worth the risk it carried. Every public appearance the princess made became a calculated risk. When she appeared strong enough to attend, layers of perfume and ceremony were arranged to shield her from scrutiny. Courtiers timed her arrival with the swell of music or the peal of bells, anything to distract from the moment she stepped into view. But the scent was unpredictable. It could remain faint for hours, or it could bloom suddenly, overpowering even the most extravagant preparations. Sometimes she would pale mid-ceremony, her composure cracking just enough for a tremor to pass through the crowd. Would she collapse? Would the smell reach the dais before she spoke? Every moment in the public eye was a gamble, and the stakes were not hers alone, they were Spain's. The most damaging moment came during a state banquet held in honor of visiting dignitaries. The long tables shimmered with silverware and candlelight, the air heavy with the aromas of roasted game, fresh bread, and imported fruits. Musicians played softly as servants moved with precision, refilling goblets and presenting dishes. But as the princess took her place among the guests, a subtle change rippled through the room. At first, the movement was slight, hands lowering wine cups, a discreet leaning away. Then plates began to shift. A few diners set down their knives entirely, murmuring excuses to their neighbors. Before the second course, a servant quietly removed entire platters from the table. The scent had won. No amount of music or candlelight could make the guests forget it. If you can picture this scene, the richest table in Europe cleared because of one princess, you understand why I tell these stories. If you're not ready to subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, then at least tell me in the comments what's holding you back. They did not have the language for what was happening to her. In the 17th century, no physician could trace illness to the invisible codes written in blood. They saw only symptoms: fainting, weakness, the persistent odor, and searched for causes in the humors, in diet, in the temperament of the soul. What they could not see was the deeper truth. Centuries of marriages between uncle and niece, cousin and cousin, had tightened the bloodline into a closed loop. Every generation, the same traits were folded back into themselves, magnifying not only beauty and title, but the recessive disorders that had once been rare flickers, now burning at the center of the family's future. Modern science would name them trimethylaminuria, a metabolic disorder that can make the body exude the stench of rotting fish, unchecked by soaps or perfumes. Genetic conditions that weaken the immune system, leaving the body vulnerable to constant illness. Deficiencies that sap the muscles, cloud the mind, and strain the heart before its time. But in her world, such explanations were still centuries away. The palace gardens, too, held their silent testimony. The royal botanists had long observed that when the same plants were bred from one another too many times, their leaves yellowed, their stems thinned, their flowers wilted long before the season's end. They noted it in ledgers, sketched the failing blooms, but no one carried these lessons to the council chamber. For the nobility, the rules that governed plants did not dare apply to kings and queens. The priests had their own interpretation. In their sermons, they spoke of her trials as a mark of God's testing, a sign that suffering purified the soul. Some whispered that the scent itself was a divine warning, a call to humility in a court grown proud. Others dared to suggest that her body was an offering, her illness a holy burden to be borne with grace. For the princess, these words were not a cure, they were a sentence. If you hear these truths now, you are already closer to her than the world of her own time ever allowed. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles so the lessons they could not see are never again ignored. If you will not, then tell me in the comments why the warning in her life should remain unheard. The first offer of marriage had been spoken of as inevitable. A match with the Holy Roman Empire would have bound Spain and Austria tighter than ever before. The papers were drawn, the terms whispered between envoys, and yet, without a declaration, without a public word, the negotiations withered. The official reason was never given. But in the quiet corners of the palace, everyone knew. The suitors' delegation had come, had dined, had observed. And then they had left, their letters home thin with polite phrases that said nothing and everything. After that, no match was spoken of with confidence. The corridors that once hummed with the excitement of alliances fell still. The princess remained where she had always been, in the palace, in her chambers, in the same measured routines. Her rooms became both sanctuary and cell. Thick curtains blocked the sun on warm days, shutting out the stares of the city below. Her walks were confined to the gardens, where she moved among the hedges and marble fountains like a figure in a painted scene, always visible, never free. The letters she wrote in those years were few, and each carefully guarded. In one, she described herself as a flower locked in its own perfume, a turn of phrase that would be quoted by poets long after her death, but in her hand it was no ornament, it was confession. She understood her condition, and the way it defined her to everyone else. The scent was not something that came and went. It was the air she lived in, the wall no alliance could cross. In the council chamber, attention turned elsewhere. If not her, then perhaps her siblings could carry the line forward. But the same blood ran in their veins, the same fragility shadowed their health. Each candidate brought its own risk. The dynasty's future, once guarded by a network of careful marriages, now stood exposed. Its strength reduced to a list of names that seemed to grow shorter each year. If you can feel her isolation even now, centuries later, then you know these aren't just stories, they're warnings. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles before they fade into silence. Or, tell me why you'd let them. The decline came quickly, as if her body had simply tired of its long resistance. The weight slipped from her frame until her gowns hung loose at the shoulders. Fainting fits grew more frequent, leaving her disoriented and unable to stand without help. Fevers took her in the night, burning through her frail body until the sheets clung damp against her skin. Every morning, the ladies-in-waiting drew open the curtains to a thinner, paler face, the eyes dimmed but still holding that careful composure taught from childhood. The physicians, once confident in their courtly remedies, turned to desperation. They crushed pearls into fine dust and stirred them into her wine, claiming purity could pass from stone to flesh. Gold leaf was dissolved in honeyed water and spooned past her lips as if wealth itself could restore her. They prescribed broths steeped with rare herbs brought across oceans, and tinctures brewed from roots so bitter they left her coughing. None of it mattered. The scent persisted, and the illness deepened. Her final public appearance came without warning. It was a gathering in the Grand Salon, a display of loyalty meant for foreign envoys. She did not walk into the room. She was carried in, the folds of her gown spilling over the arms of her chair. Her skin was the color of wax, her lips tinged with blue. She did not speak, did not smile, only allowed herself to be seen. And those who saw her understood. It was a farewell given in silence. Not long after, the palace bells tolled, their deep voices carrying across the rooftops of Madrid. She was gone. Her body was sealed in a tomb at El Escorial, among kings and queens whose blood she had been born to preserve. But the palace was not emptied of her entirely. For weeks after her burial, servants swore the air in her chambers still carried her scent. Faint at first, then sharper in the cold hours before dawn. They closed the doors, but it drifted out into the corridors, settling over the place she had once walked. Some said it was memory. Others whispered it was warning. If you can still sense her presence now, then you understand why these stories endure. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles so her shadow is not erased. Or tell me in the comments why you'd let her fade into nothing. In the years that followed, her presence became a thing of whispers and shadows. New servants, unaware of the past, were warned quietly by the older staff. Never linger outside those doors after nightfall. They claimed the corridors near her old chambers grew colder after midnight, that a faint draft carried a scent unlike any other, a sudden, sour sharpness that made the skin prickle. Some said they heard the soft rustle of silk behind them, though no one was there. Others swore they had glimpsed the outline of a young woman in the half-light, her face turned away, moving soundlessly toward the place she once called her own. With time, the scent ceased to be merely a personal misfortune. It became an emblem. Courtiers who remembered her spoke of it as a mark on the dynasty itself, a truth that no golden crown could conceal. It was the smell of a house that had sealed itself off from the world for too long, rotting in its own grandeur. The Habsburgs could mask it with incense, drown it in music, bury it beneath ceremony, but it would return. Just as the cracks in their power would return, no matter how carefully they painted over them. Centuries later, the world would remember her face but not her air. In the halls of museums, her portraits hang in gilded frames, serene, composed, the perfect image of a royal daughter. The placards speak of lineage, of political ties, of the artistry of her age. They do not speak of the smell. That truth lies buried in private letters, in the brittle pages of diaries kept by those who dared write it down. And even those accounts grow rarer with each passing year. The scent was not the only thing that lingered, it was the warning. If you've watched this far, you've carried her memory further than her own court dared. Subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, so no other story like hers rots in silence. And if you won't, then step into the comments and tell me why her memory isn't worth saving.